Well, at the end of a very busy and, may we say, eventful sitting week, let's get straight into it. Joining me now is Peter's fantastic Friday night panel, Luke Grant, host of Overnights on 2GB, and James Ashby, Pauline Hanson's One Nation Chief of Staff. Gentlemen, Paul Keating is at it again after obviously his National Press Club performance last week. Keating's taken to the pages of the AFR today to hit out again at the AUKUS nuclear submarine deal, and once again it's Richard Marles and Penny Wong in the firing line. Luke, you know, he's hit out basically at being called out of touch, and I don't know, perhaps it's a touch of the old relevance deprivation syndrome, but why does he keep taking the side of China? I mean, surely he can see that this is shattering his credibility by the day.
Caleb, it's a good point. Look, those of us that live in a time where our lobsters are left to rot on the runway, our barley wasn't welcome, we dared ask about the origins of COVID-19, and of course we had the mother of all dummy spits from Xi Jinping and the Chinese government. It's pretty difficult to convince today's Australians that, you know what, China's just there, they're good blokes, no problem, they're not going to invade, no dramas. I don't think many Australians that have seen what's happened in the last couple of years are buying into Mr Keating's words. He's entitled to his view. I respect him as a former Prime Minister. I don't know if it's a relevance deprivation, Caleb, but there's something going on there. That is for sure, my friend.
He doesn't go quietly, the old PJK. Now, James, it's one day, obviously, since the Prime Minister's emotional announcement yesterday, unveiling the wording and time frame for the voice. The PM's going all in here, basically. He's trying to secure a strong and long run-up to this referendum. But if this all goes wrong, and we've seen the criticism, obviously, from Greg Craven and Warren Mundine, particularly from a legal perspective, if he doesn't pull this referendum off, his Prime Ministership is finished, along with the cause of reconciliation with it.
Yeah, 100%. And it could be the case of a one-term wonder for Mr Albanese. But never would I have ever believed I'd say this, but it really makes us believe that Bill Shorten would have made a better Prime Minister. Look, I said this to Luke yesterday when we were talking via text. You know, the crocodile tears yesterday weren't on display for the people who are sleeping in cars across this country. They weren't certainly on display for the people who are waiting in hospital queues across the country. No, he has gone after a very, very divisive plan here to pit Aboriginals against everyday Australians. And I think the greatest losers here are the majority of Aboriginals who haven't called for this. And I think when you take into consideration there were 20 Indigenous people that flew in from across the country, from remote parts of this country on Wednesday to try and meet with the Prime Minister, or at very least the Indigenous Minister herself, they were completely ignored by this Labor Party. So Labor say they're open to giving Aboriginals a voice. They're not serious about it. Let's be honest. This is highly divisive. It's going to end in tears.
And the one thing that really hasn't been talked about much yet is the concept of the double majority, which is, you know, in a referendum, you need the majority of people in the majority of states. And it's entirely possible that, you know, you end up with, say, 55, 56% of people in the country voting for it, but if they don't get the majority of states, the thing will still fall over and Albo ends up with egg on his face. It's a pretty big risk to take, I have to say, when they haven't lined it all up. Now, a new report out today, the Reserve Bank has offered a sobering assessment on the rental market, but I don't think it will particularly come as a surprise to anyone who's been renting in our capital cities any time lately. Luke, the report basically blames sluggish home construction, investment, and obviously continued high demand for properties. It's going to continue to force up rents and lock up availability. I mean, you're on Talkback every night. What are you hearing from renters or even landlords about the situation?
Well, from renters, let's start there. Very, very difficult. Very, very difficult. I mean, we've got pensioners right now in Australia. We know with the surge in power prices, it's heat or eat when it comes to winter. And it's not that bad from what I'm hearing from my listeners for renters, but It's certainly very tough, and sacrifices are being made. Now, this will be blamed by some on the pandemic, but what we saw this week, Caleb, we saw the classic government intervention. We had the Premier of Queensland come out and say, we're going to put a rent on cabs. That'll help people. That will not help people. That will keep investors out of the market. It will have people who are in the market now get out of the market and invest somewhere else because they're entitled to put up some capital and get a return. Government's got to get out of the way. This is about red tape. This is about opening up land. This is about making it easy for people, for institutions, whatever, to build premises and give people some space. More properties, lower rents. It's pretty obvious. Governments just have to stop interfering.
Well, if governments want to get involved, I'll tell them one thing they ought to look at, and that's the number of properties that are owned by Chinese investors in this country. There are apartment buildings in capital cities all over this country that are near empty because the apartments have all been bought off the plan by Chinese investors and no one's in them. It's probably about time we took a look at the investment rules. Now, it's been said that history never repeats itself, but it does often rhyme. And I've got to say, it certainly felt like that in Parliament this week as the Greens torpedo Labor's safeguard mechanism, which is quite reminiscent of their actions back in 2009 when it came to an emissions trading scheme. And you've got two former Greens leaders, Bob Brown and Christine Milne. They've both encouraged the Greens to veto the legislation if new coal and gas projects are not banned. I mean, James, it's always fun to see Greens and Labor tear themselves apart, but it would be the biggest own goal if they voted down this legislation because they're not happy with a little bit of it. I just think it's beautiful.
Yeah, well, it might be fun for you to watch from the sideline. I find it awfully frustrating, to be honest, Caleb. Look, Jackie Lambie's also out there suggesting the same thing. And so this is going to take not only the Greens, but it's going to take a David Pocock and Jackie Lambie to get this across the line. It's a dangerous platform. It's a dangerous game they're playing. Australians are going to pay the consequences for this. Why? Because they're going to have to pay higher prices, because once they reach that threshold on their carbon dioxide emissions, it's tools down, shut shop, no more business for those 215 that they've identified that'll come in under this safeguard mechanism. So, hey, Caleb, by the way, people in New South Wales vote Mark Latham tomorrow at the election.
That will be certainly one of the big stories. It'll be one of the big stories tomorrow, how One Nation does. And Luke, quickly, I mean...
It will be.
What do you think the chances are of Labor actually giving in to Greens on their demands to ban new coal and gas projects, and what would it do if they did?
You hate to think. But you know what? This is politics 2023 style. The other mob for 10 years, denial, inaction. So they get just a little bit further down the track and that's not good enough. Who are these people? I mean, seriously, 10 years of inaction?
I know.
They get given a little bit. No, I don't want that. I want everything. Oh, the petulance. It's just, what can you say other than Mark Latham? Mark Latham will do very well tomorrow, James. Don't you worry.
Look, on that basis, I'd almost be happy to say vote One Greens, because if it's going to mean less Green Dream going on, then I'm all for it. Luke and James, thank you for joining me tonight.